I woke up to find my mailbox missing. Not vandalized, not broken, just gone. Like some thief had decided, out of all the things they could steal, that my boring, standard-issue mailbox was a prize worth taking. I stood on my front lawn in my slippers, staring at the empty post like an idiot, wondering if I was losing my mind. I even checked the ground for tire tracks, as if someone had pulled off a full-scale heist. Maybe a new underground market for stolen mailboxes had popped up overnight. I walked around in circles, half expecting some hidden camera crew to jump out and yell, "Surprise! You've been pranked." But there was nothing. No clues, no explanation, just a missing mailbox and a growing suspicion that someone in the neighborhood had lost their grip on reality. And that someone, if I had to bet money on it, was Karen. Karen was that neighbor. The self-appointed queen of the HOA, the kind of person who measured people's lawns with a ruler and left passive-aggressive notes on cars parked an inch over the line. She had the power of pettiness down to an art. And judging by how her eyes flickered toward my house every time she walked by, I knew she had something to do with this. But accusing her without proof would be like poking a bear that was also a lawyer who specialized in HOA bylaws. At first, I tried to be reasonable. Maybe it was the wind, I told myself. Maybe some teenagers thought it would be funny to steal a mailbox. But when I went to talk to my mailman, the moment I mentioned my missing mailbox, he let out a sigh so deep you'd think I had just asked him about his divorce. "Yeah, I figured," he said, shaking his head. "You're not the first." That got my attention. Wait. Other mailboxes have been stolen. He looked around like he was making sure no one was listening. Not stolen. Replaced. I blinked. What? He leaned in, lowering his voice. Every time a mailbox goes missing, someone in this neighborhood gets a brand new one. Real fancy ones too. With extra locks, engraved names, the works. I turned my head slowly toward Karen's house. And sure enough, there it was. A mailbox that hadn't been there before. A brand spanking new, deluxe, top-of-the-line mailbox. I stared at it. My blood pressure spiked. Was this real life? Was Karen out here running some kind of black market mailbox operation? I decided to pay her a visit. She answered the door with the kind of fake cheerfulness that made my teeth hurt. "Oh, hi. What can I do for you?" I cut right to the chase. "My mailbox is missing." Her eyes widened, full of mock surprise. "Oh no. How terrible. Do you think someone stole it?" I narrowed my eyes. "Do you think someone stole it?" She gasped. Actually gasped. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because you have a brand new mailbox sitting in your yard," I wanted to say. "Because I know you live for this kind of HOA-level nonsense. Because this is exactly the kind of petty crime that screams, Karen." But instead, I forced a smile. "Just wondering. You know, since you keep such careful track of everything in this neighborhood." Her fake smile twitched. "Well, I hope you find it," she chirped, and then she closed the door before I could say another word. I stood there, staring at the wood grain of her door, fighting the urge to bang my head against it. There was no way she didn't do it. But without proof, all I had was my growing rage and a missing mailbox. So I got a new one. A nice, sturdy one, bolted down properly so no random gust of wind or group of delinquent teenagers could make off with it. I even made a point to take a picture of it, solid evidence that yes, I did have a mailbox. The next morning, it was gone. I stood there, clutching my coffee cup, staring at the empty space where my mailbox should have been. My brain struggled to process it. There was no way. There was no way someone had stolen it again. I took a deep breath, then another, and then I turned my head slowly toward Karen's house. Her mailbox had changed. Again. A newer model. Bigger, shinier. I saw red. I marched right up to her house and knocked so hard I was surprised the door didn't fall off its hinges. Karen opened it with a wide smile that melted the second she saw my face. "Oh my. Are you okay?" I pointed at her mailbox. "That wasn't there yesterday." She blinked at me like I had just accused her of stealing the Mona Lisa. I upgrade my mailbox regularly, she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Nothing wrong with keeping up with the times. I took a slow, deep breath. Karen, where is my mailbox? She gasped again. It wasn't even a real gasp. It was the kind of performance that would get someone kicked off a soap opera. Oh my goodness! You lost it again? That's so strange. My fists clenched. This is a federal crime. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh please. It's just a mailbox. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? Because it was mine. Because mail theft was a literal crime. Because I was about 2 seconds away from dragging her mailbox out of the ground with my bare hands, just to make a point. Instead, I took a step back. Okay, I said, voice tight. All right. She beamed. See? No reason to get worked up. I didn't answer. I was too busy plotting my revenge. The next mailbox I installed? It wasn't just any mailbox. It was a trap. And Karen? She was about to walk straight into it. I refused to be the neighborhood joke. Karen had stolen from me twice, right under my nose, and then had the audacity to act like I was the problem. But this time, I wasn't just replacing my mailbox. I was setting a trap. The first step was installing a hidden camera. I wanted something discreet, something she wouldn't even think to check for. A regular security camera would be too obvious. Karen was sneaky, but I was smarter. So, I got a tiny camera disguised as a birdhouse and mounted it right across from where my mailbox stood. Perfect angle, perfect coverage. If she so much as breathed in the direction of my mailbox, I would have proof. But I wasn't just going to wait. I needed bait. Karen was bold, but she needed motivation. So, I made sure she had one. I placed a fake envelope inside my mailbox, making sure the top peeked out just enough to catch attention. On it, I wrote in big, bold letters, IRS refund check. If there was one thing that could tempt a nosy neighbor with sticky fingers, it was the promise of free money. Then I waited. For the first night, nothing happened. I watched the footage the next morning, scrolling through hours of absolutely nothing. Just an occasional passing car, a stray cat, a jogger. No Karen. No mailbox theft. I started to wonder if maybe she had finally learned her lesson. Maybe she had gotten scared off. But on the second night, just past 2 in the morning, movement flickered on the screen. My stomach clenched with anticipation as I hit play. There she was. Karen. Creeping across my yard like a cartoon villain, looking left and right like she was in some kind of heist movie. She wore all black, like she actually thought dressing like a burglar would somehow make her invisible. My jaw clenched as I watched her approach the mailbox, tilt her head to the side, and reach for the envelope. And then, something unexpected happened. She hesitated. For a split second, she glanced over her shoulder, as if she was waiting for someone. Then, out of the shadows, another person appeared. A second thief. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse hammering. The second person was younger, moving faster, more confidently. He whispered something to Karen, and she nodded before stepping back, letting him take over. And just like that, he yanked my mailbox clean off the post. No hesitation, no struggle. I rewound the footage. Watched it again. Karen had an accomplice. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who was he? A friend? A hired hand? Then, as the camera caught a sliver of his face in the streetlight, realization smacked me across the face. It was her son. I knew because I had seen him before, the same entitled kid who drove too fast through the neighborhood, the same one who never made eye contact when people talked to him. The same kid who had once, years ago, tried to sell me overpriced chocolate for some fundraiser that didn't exist. My stomach twisted with a mix of rage and satisfaction. I had them both. The next morning, I went straight to Karen's house. This time, I didn't knock politely. I pounded on her door. She opened it, her usual fake smile plastered on her face. Oh, what a surprise. What can I do for you? I held up my phone. You stole my mailbox. Again. Her smile didn't falter. "Oh my goodness, again? You really must have terrible luck." I played the footage. Right there, in front of her. She watched, her eyes darting back and forth between the screen and my face. When her son appeared on the footage, her breath hitched. I saw it. The tiniest flicker of panic. I smiled. "Looks like bad luck runs in the family." She crossed her arms, trying to regain control. "That could be anyone in that video." I tilted my head. "You sure about that? Because I'm pretty sure the postal inspectors will be able to identify him. You know, considering that mail theft is a federal crime." Her whole body stiffened. That's when I knew she was in deep. But then, instead of admitting defeat, she did what Karens do best. She doubled down. "You wouldn't," she said, her voice low. "You're not going to waste your time reporting something so minor." I grinned. "You don't know me very well, do you?" Her jaw clenched. She glanced behind her, as if checking if her son had heard any of this. Then she switched tactics. "Listen," she said, her voice suddenly sickly sweet. "Why don't we just handle this ourselves? No need to involve the police. I can make it up to you. Maybe I could pull some strings in the HOA. Get that shed of yours approved? I know they've been rejecting your requests." I laughed. "Bribery? Really? That's the play." She straightened, finally dropping the act. "What do you want?" I let the silence stretch between us. Then I said, "I want my mailbox back. And I want you to return it yourself." She let out a small, humorless chuckle. "You're joking." I stared at her. Do I look like I'm joking? For a second, I thought she was going to slam the door in my face. Then, with a deep, furious breath, she muttered, "Fine." An hour later, Karen and her son stood in my front yard, awkward and stiff as they dragged my stolen mailbox back to its rightful place. Neighbors gathered. Some whispered. Some outright laughed. But me? I just stood there, arms crossed, watching as Karen, red-faced and furious, reinstalled my mailbox with her own 2 hands. When she was done, she dusted off her hands and glared at me. "Happy now?" I pulled out my phone. "Very. Now let's send this footage to the postal inspectors." Her face drained of color. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment Karen realized I was serious about reporting her, she lost the smugness she had carried this entire time. Her usual fake politeness had evaporated, replaced with something closer to fear. She wasn't just some nosy neighbor who had pushed the HOA rules too far this time. She had committed a federal crime. At first, she tried reasoning with me, as if we were 2 friends settling a petty dispute. She kept insisting that I was blowing this way out of proportion, and that no one actually gets in trouble for something like this. But I wasn't buying it. I didn't even have to lift a finger at that point. The moment I submitted the footage to the postal inspectors, things moved faster than I had expected. The mail theft unit took these kinds of cases very seriously, and as it turned out, Karen had been up to more than just stealing my mailbox. A few days after I reported the footage, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found 2 men in suits standing there, flashing their badges. Postal inspectors. They weren't playing around. They asked me a few questions, went over my footage, and thanked me for my cooperation. But just as they were about to leave, one of them turned back to me and asked a question that made my stomach drop. "Have you ever noticed anything else suspicious about her?" I hesitated. "Like what?" The inspector exchanged a glance with his partner. "She's been flagged for multiple complaints of mail tampering. Yours is just the latest case." I didn't know what to say. I had assumed Karen's pettiness was directed at me, that she had stolen my mailbox purely out of some personal vendetta or power trip. But now I was starting to realize this ran deeper. "Wait," I said, trying to piece it together. "So she's been stealing other people's mail, too?" The inspector nodded. "We can't discuss details, but let's just say this isn't her first offense." I wasn't sure whether to be surprised or not. This whole time, I had been thinking Karen was just a bitter, entitled neighbor who enjoyed making my life difficult. But now I was starting to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about me. Karen had been running some kind of mail theft operation, and I had just handed over the evidence they needed to take her down. It didn't take long for things to escalate. The next morning, the entire neighborhood woke up to Karen getting arrested in broad daylight. I was sitting on my porch, drinking my coffee, when I saw the postal inspectors return. This time with local law enforcement. They knocked on Karen's door, and when she opened it, her usual over-the-top confidence was gone. At first, she tried arguing with them, her voice rising in that familiar screechy tone that had terrorized our HOA meetings for years. But they weren't interested in her excuses. Her son came outside next, looking panicked. He tried to defend her, but one of the officers turned to him and said something I'll never forget. "Kid, you don't want to get dragged into this. You can either walk away now, or you can go down with her." For a split second, he looked torn. And then, in the most shocking betrayal I've ever seen, he turned on his own mother. "I didn't even want to do it," he blurted out. "She made me. She said no one would ever catch us." I nearly choked on my coffee. Karen's head snapped toward him, her face twisting in horror. "You little traitor!" But it was too late. He had spilled enough. The officers pulled out the handcuffs, and before she could even process what was happening, they slapped them onto her wrist. The entire street had gathered to watch. Some people gasped. Others whispered. And a few? They started clapping. Karen screamed about how it was all a mistake, how she was being set up, how I had orchestrated this whole thing to make her look bad. But it didn't matter. The moment they put her in the back of the police car, it was over. I stood there, watching as the woman who had terrorized this neighborhood for years got driven away in disgrace. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered justice. But the best part? Her downfall took the entire HOA down with her. Once word got out that the president of our homeowners association had been arrested for federal mail theft, people started digging into the shady rules and fines she had enforced over the years. Turns out, Karen had been pocketing some of the HOA fees for years, claiming they were for neighborhood improvements that never actually happened. The HOA crumbled overnight. The remaining members, desperate to save themselves, immediately held an emergency meeting. And guess who they elected as the new HOA president? Me. It was poetic justice at its finest. The same woman who had tried to make my life miserable had just handed me the very power she had abused for years. The first order of business? Fixing every single ridiculous rule Karen had put in place. No more absurd parking fines. No more unnecessary grass height restrictions. And most importantly, no more Karen-proof mailboxes. I made sure of it. The neighborhood finally breathed a sigh of relief. People started coming together in ways they hadn't before, no longer living under the iron fist of Karen's HOA dictatorship. Barbecues, community events, even friendly conversations over fences. It was like the neighborhood had come back to life. And me? I got my mailbox back. And this time, I made sure it was bolted down with industrial-grade cement, just in case someone else got any ideas. But honestly, I doubted anyone would ever be bold enough to try stealing it again. Because the entire neighborhood had learned one important lesson. Mess with my mailbox, and you're messing with federal law.